personally think is like just marketing crap. Basically, it was all a lot of this grows out of the Hollywood production code of the 1930s because they got freaked out by the horror film.
Kurt, how's it going?
Oh, fine. How are you?
I'm well. Wow, is that your home with all the CDs in the background or whatnot? That's your
Yeah,
setup?
albums, CDs. Yeah, it's my garage. Yeah.
Hey man, that's the kind of garage that looks like in a sense like a library or a place to visit, not a place to just store old junk. So this is pretty awesome. I've never seen a garage like that.
I got a lot of stuff, yeah, thousands of Blu-rays and books and all of that. So
and it's well organized too in containers, as I can see.
It's all I used to work at a record store, so alphabetical and chronological.
Makes sense then. So you're kind of a junkie of music and movies, I'm guessing, right? Yeah. And collecting it.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, then, I mean, I just got like emails saying that I had the next episode of the show, A History of Horror. This has been an awesome franchise. And you know what? It's so fitting that you guys are with AMC, because for me, it's like AMC is like a network for horror. Like when it comes to October, like AMC's got it laid out better than anyone else when it comes to horror. So this was like a perfect marriage, I'm guessing. Was this like the plan from the start to connect with AMC?
Yeah, well, that was AMC's plan.
Well, the good one.
Yeah, and you're right. They have a good grip on the horror space, I think, basically, and they're certainly very sympathetic. The network's been really great about this project and letting us do what we want to do. It's been a very happy experience for everyone.
Have you been always a horror guy? Like, is that the genre that's really interested you, or just kind of came around this project and you had some knowledge about it? How is your history with horror?
Mine goes way back, since I was a little kid. So I was a morbid little kid and really liked horror films and science fiction films, science fiction horror in particular, that kind of thing. So I'm definitely a horror guy. And seeing this project, I saw the name of this project on somebody's development board when I walked into an office, and I said, "What's that?" And then they told me, and I said, "I want to do that." And then I had meetings, met Eli, and here I am. So
there's a history of how it started. Was Eli attached to it from the start, or was there any consideration for someone else to hold? I think he's like the guy for this. I can't imagine anyone else.
No, Eli was attached. I mean, it grew from Eli, so he wanted to do something like this, and because Eli has a historian aspect to him, he's another kind of human encyclopedia, film encyclopedia. There are a few of these guys, and a couple of women I've met who have that kind of knowledge, like really deep knowledge of the genre across the board. So Eli's one of them. Joe Dante, John Landis, Rebecca McKendry over at USC. She's really good. So
it's so Eli narrates this. So basically a lot of this stuff is like not even you writing it. It's his just knowledge. And how is the collaboration?
No, I write that. I write the narration.
Okay. There you go. Well,
I write and direct all the episodes. So yeah.
How do you guys collaborate then together? Because you're mentioning his vast knowledge, and you're kind of
we agree in there's a list of films we put together, then we pitch it to the network, and then we see what works for them basically in their schedule, and then basically line up the interviewees, and then I assemble the episodes and kind of run the rough cuts past him, and he checks them out and gives feedback and all of that, and just evolves from there. It's kind of a normal process in these sort of shows where you're working with the directors actually off directing. So for instance, like during this season, Eli is directing Borderlands, which he's editing right now. So
I love the themes of these shows. I think they're really clever and creative, kind of, and precise, like the horror sequels or best horror holiday films. Like, I love how it's separated, and yet there's so much content on each one. when it comes to themes, has there been some that you haven't been able to do or have been scrapped
sure.
that you wanted to do? Like what sort of themes that you're in a sense personally itching to do? Because I love the themes so far that we've seen.
Well, Mad Scientist is one that I've been wanting to do
Oh,
forever. So that's episode 6, and which is actually still being finished as we speak. Be done probably early next week. And I was really happy with that. That covers a lot of cool territory. Eli and I both are always looking for ways to get international films, international horror films into things, either as a separate episodes or just to work into these themes, whatever they'll let us do, basically. So, because it is AMC, so it needs to kind of tie into what they're doing, and it has to appeal to a broad enough American audience to see things, basically. But at the same time, we look for ways to smuggle these things in. And yeah, there are a bunch of other topics, but I don't want to necessarily give anything away yet because I'm still pitching the 4th season.
So you guys are working a 4th or still on the 3rd, technically?
Well, I'm finishing the 3rd, but
oh wow, so it's not done completely. That's
we're talking about, if there's a 4th. So, if all goes well, it would be nice to have a 4th season.
It sure would. And would your plan be to just air it during October season for a 4th?
Yeah,
or maybe
so is every year.
Yeah.
Fest, yeah.
Makes sense. One thing also I'm curious about, like, I love how you guys cover different decades in a sense, and it's wide spanning. How much of the consideration goes to stuff that, like, a lot of the horror kind of, I feel like 80s was like the prime year for, like, at least a big franchise with Halloween and or late 70s in that matter, Friday 13th. But like, how far do you want to honor that and then bring in the newer franchises into like conversation? Because there's mentions of some of the newer ones too.
Well, that's the trick, basically. And it's sort of like with comic books, where you got Golden Age and Silver Age and modern stuff. Basically, it's very similar. So I'm always trying to get in more like classic horror, like Golden Age stuff. So Mad Scientists actually has more of that, but then it links to modern films because you can see these through lines. So you have something like Frankenstein, and Island of Lost Souls, and then that's kind of a straight line to Ex Machina, for instance. So it's the same movie basically. It's just with AI, and so we try to look for ways to get the newer films in and newer franchises that people recognize, and then to also work on these other films from the Silver Age and Golden Age period.
Another interesting, I always kind of wondered that about horror, because it's always, in a sense, sometimes it's like horror, sci-fi, horror, thriller. Like, how do you differentiate, like, in a sense, pure horror, maybe the slasher kind versus like the thriller psychological?
I think that's one of those things I personally think is like just marketing crap. Basically, it was all a lot of this grows out of the Hollywood production code of the 1930s, because they got freaked out by the horror films, these big budget horror films like Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Mad Love, and Dr. X. They were really legitimately creepy, in some cases really disturbing films. Like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is messed up. But
and the silent ones too. Yeah,
who knows? Yeah, but and so there's this big reaction with the do-gooders coming in and making films terrible, basically, at the production code. And then horror became a dirty word, and then horror became associated with just B films. So then they had to come up with some other way to market it. So then they started calling them thrillers and chillers and whatever. It's psychological horror,
right.
And part of that also is with agents in Hollywood too, is just like, oh, my actress, my client is not doing a horror film. This is a psychological drama. It's like, oh, bullshit. It's
it's true. Yeah, exactly. Because it does have the elements of horror to keep it afloat,
Exactly. Yeah. And so a lot of these films that, they call it, like, Silence of the Lambs is a horror film, that is a straight up horror film. And they didn't want to call it that because, you don't get Oscars, but in that case, they did get Oscars. So you would think that, people would eventually realize that, something like Get Out is a horror film. It's also a really good film. So, these things are not separate, they can be the same thing. So to me, it's an arbitrary designation. Because I think, Psycho, if anything, yes, it's psychological. But it's also one of the first slasher films. It's a horror film.
Yeah,
So
no, that's well put. I'm glad you kind of clarified that and made it seem, because it's true. It's almost kind of like tarnishing the horror, in a sense, what it is, by adding these little, asterisks to it, but we know where it comes from. It's not a comedy, certainly, it's horror based, and that's the meat and bones of it, no pun intended, of what these other films are, even though they try to add the different titles to it.
Yeah, I think if it creeps you out, qualifies. So
absolutely. I'm also very impressed how you guys managed to bring on so many big name actors and people involved in these films. I mean, Robert Englund, you had Vanessa Hudgens, you had so many like current and former and recognizable faces of horror. So I'd imagine that it's not the easiest task to get them on board for anything, but you guys have really gotten
it's not easy, and it was particularly difficult this year because of COVID. So because we started shooting in February. Things were not good in February. It was very, very difficult to get people in and to figure this out and to shoot under those conditions. It gradually got better, of course, once the vaccines finally came out, but it was very hard. At the same time, this season was actually really great as far as lining up people. So we got, part of that, of course, it helps that Eli was shooting a movie with Jamie Lee Curtis and Cate Blanchett, so that a little easier. But generally speaking, I think, particularly now that we've got a couple of seasons, and generally, people, creators, and people in the industry, when they see the series, they know that it is made by filmmakers who are making a series about filmmaking, and it's not just like some top 10 list show. It's not just like, ooh, scary movies. It's more about the craft of it. And I think that's helped because Eli is a director, and so it's kind of a director's show, which is, and so therefore it's easy for us to get the directors usually, because most of them are pretty cool about it and want to talk about it. And then once you've got the directors of the film, then it becomes a little easier to get the actors.
How do you distinguish? I mean, certainly some actors and directors are involved in a franchise or in a genre, so it's second nature to them. But you also have other actors who've been in different horror films talking about a specific one. How easy is it to get them to part of the conversation, or how much do you need to prep in a sense of their knowledge of a certain movie, especially if they weren't part of it, or maybe?
Well, I have a list of all these films, that we're going to do in advance, and I usually run them past people, but because there's so many films, often I have to divide it up. But there's some people, some actors, some writers, who are into films more than others. So I'm often surprised when I meet actors who actually haven't seen anything and aren't interested, because you think it's their business, but it's not always the case. And in that case, you kind of have to just drill down on the one film that they have experience with, that they're involved with. But then you meet other people who watch a bunch of stuff and love these things and love these performances.
Yeah, if we are a fan of something, you naturally want to talk about it. It just kind of gets you excited about it. And just like me being excited talking to you about this, because I really enjoy the show, and kind of it's a trip down memory lane for a lot of these things that we grew up with. And horror is one of these genres that stays with you no matter what. You kind of remember it throughout the years more so than any other genre. I feel like I remember Chucky was like the first introduction for me into horror. Like in certain ways, it just stays with you. There's something about horror.
Yep, exactly. So, well, Don Mancini will be glad to hear that. So
there you go.
We like to think that he's, made an impression on a generation through Chucky.
Certainly, and I've interviewed a lot of these people involved. Jennifer Tilly, Robert Englund. So it's fun. It's interesting when you watch the movies and then you meet them in real life and they're like the sweetest individuals and they play like the nastiest villains. That's the cool part for me. It's like, wow, you get to see a whole different side. You never imagined them to be like that in person.
Yeah, that actually is one reason why it is like a little easier to get actors on too, is like most of the people who make horror films are pretty cool, pretty nice people, and not at all what you'd expect. I've had this conversation with people about how difficult it would be to say do a series like this about action film directors, or action films, or even comedy, because like the egos and the fights and all of that they're so much more intense, particularly in the action film world where you have a lot of very big personalities.
Truth. Yeah, so, there's something about that kind of guerrilla filmmaking about horror. It's usually easier to make and cheaper to make, and it's just something about that community that it bonds. It's more like independent style before independent was kind of cool. I feel like horror kind of always came from that.
And I think Mick Garris would always argue that, because it's treated like a ghetto genre, so therefore all the people working in it have a certain camaraderie that which I'd also argue is in some ways similar to the punk rock DIY spirit as well. So that, you're in this thing. It's a subculture that you voluntarily join and are part of, and is not for everybody, but the people in it usually can come together and do something cool despite the odds.
And finally, wanted to ask you, where do you kind of see, as someone who's done this show, observed horror, you know the history of it, you've been with it. Do you like the direction the films are going these days? I mean, do you like the future of the genre? I mean, it's always going to be around, but how do you feel about it? Is it strong, or is it weaker? It needs to get better. What's your kind of opinion on
it? It's strong because these films are still like one of the few films that sell theatrically, that can you can still get people in the theaters to see, because it's kind of a uniquely, often a communal experience. They're better seen with a bunch of people, just like comedies are, I think. Though certainly I've watched a ton of horror films at home, but they still make money, more importantly, that way. So you can spend for a relatively small cash investment, you can get a big return. This is Jason Blum's entire philosophy of life. And it does quite well with it. So from that aspect, I think people always keep making them. So, but there'll always be these trends, and who knows what will happen. I mean, in the wake of COVID and all of that, there's going to be some kind of psychic, there's repression, and then that will need some form of outlet. And I'm not sure what that will be, what kind of films that people will want to see. They will probably not want to see a bunch of virus films, but they will want something that lets it out, just the same way that, the Universal horror films kind of hit this nerve that was, the people living through the Depression, wasn't expressly about, poor people combing the countryside, whatever, marauding or whatever else, or striking back against the rich. It was came out in the form of just these, blood-sucking monsters and hideous creations of technology, which are kind of, you can see the cultural anxieties coming through that, but it's very abstract. So I don't know, but I do know there are a lot of really good filmmakers making stuff like out there who are really pushing the envelope in different ways, like Jordan Peele, who's awesome, and Ari Aster, I think, does really interesting work, and many other people. So a lot of Gigi Salguero actually is doing some interesting stuff too. So there are lots of good voices.
Well said. Well, hey, I enjoy the I've been a fan of the series. I hope there's a season 4. I'm excited to continue watching this. It's, for me, it's like, this is the perfect month that you guys have it on. It just gives you all the good feels and makes you want to see all these films. I think that's the cool part, is like, you want to keep on watching AMC for all these movies, and it reintroduces to you. So fantastic job for you and Eli and the whole team. Keep it up.
We will. people let us. We will.
Absolutely. I sure hope they do. So I'll champion that. Thanks so much, Kurt, for the time. Really appreciate you talking to me, and hope we catch up on the next one.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care. Have a good one.